The courthouse clerk discovered it first, a stack of birth certificates unlike any he had seen in 30 years of record-keeping. All bore the same mother's name. All listed the father as unknown. There were 43 of them. This is not a ghost story. This is not folklore. This is what happened when a young circuit judge arrived in Harrison County, Mississippi in the autumn of 1851 and stumbled upon records that would haunt him until his final days. Judge Thomas Hale was 29 years old when he accepted the appointment to Mississippi's 3rd Judicial Circuit. Fresh from law school in Philadelphia, idealistic but not naive, he understood the institution of slavery in the abstract. He had read the statutes, studied the property laws, memorized the precedents. What he didn't expect was how the paperwork would tell stories the law tried to silence. His first month in Harrison County was routine: land disputes, contract disagreements, estate settlements. The courthouse sat on a hill overlooking the town square, a modest building with peeling paint and floors that creaked under the weight of decades. The records room occupied the entire basement, a maze of shelves holding birth registers, death certificates, property deeds, and court proceedings dating back to 1817. Clerk William Dobbs had worked in that basement since he was 16. Now 46, he knew every volume, every filing system, every anomaly in the county's documented history. He had thin fingers permanently stained with ink and a habit of muttering to himself while he worked. On October 14, 1851, Dobbs climbed the stairs to the judge's chambers, carrying a leather folder. His face was pale. "Your Honor, I need you to see something. I've been organizing the birth records from the Berkshire Plantation, and there's something wrong with them." Judge Hale looked up from a contract dispute. "Wrong how?" Dobbs placed the folder on the desk and opened it carefully, as if the papers inside might scatter like frightened birds. Inside were 43 birth certificates, all handwritten in different scripts by different officials over different years, but all sharing the same peculiar characteristic. Mother, Sarah. Father, unknown. Every single one. The judge frowned and began examining the documents. The births spanned from 1829 to 1851, 22 years. The children's names were listed: Samuel, born March 1829. Ruth, born November 1830. James, born February 1832. On and on, the list continued, an unbroken chain of children born to the same woman, with no father ever recorded. Perhaps she had relations with multiple men who weren't recorded, Judge Hale suggested, though even as he said it, the explanation felt incomplete. Dobbs shook his head. "Your Honor, I've been doing this work for 3 decades. Sometimes fathers aren't listed, yes, but 43 times for the same woman. I pulled records from every plantation in the county for comparison. Most enslaved births list no father, that's common enough. But I've never seen this volume attached to a single name. And there's something else." He pulled out a separate sheet, a timeline he had constructed himself. "Look at the spacing. Sarah gave birth 43 times in 22 years. That's a child every 6 months on average. Your Honor, that's not possible, not naturally." The judge studied the timeline. Dobbs was right. Some births were listed only 7 or 8 months apart. The human gestation period made such timing impossible for a single woman. "Could there be multiple women named Sarah on the same plantation?" Hale asked. "I thought of that, but look at the notation here." Dobbs pointed to a small mark in the corner of each certificate. "Property registration number 1147. Same number on every certificate. According to plantation records, that number belonged to one woman only." Judge Hale sat back in his chair. The autumn light filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the document spread before him. Something was deeply wrong with these records, but he couldn't yet see the shape of it. "I want to visit Berkshire Plantation," he said finally, "and I want to see Sarah herself." Berkshire Plantation sat 12 miles west of the courthouse, accessible by a road that turned to mud whenever it rained. The property sprawled across 800 acres of cotton fields, bordered by dense pine forests on 3 sides and the slow-moving Leaf River on the 4th. The plantation owner was Colonel Marcus Berkshire, a man in his late 60s who had inherited the property from his father and expanded it considerably. He was known in the county as fair but firm, a veteran of the War of 1812 who ran his plantation with military precision. Judge Hale arrived on a clear October morning, his horse kicking up dust on the path leading to the main house, a grand structure with white columns and wide verandas, built in the Greek Revival style popular among wealthy planters. Colonel Berkshire received him in the study, a room lined with books and hunting trophies. The old man was cordial but confused by the visit. "A judge examining birth records? That's unusual, Mr. Hale. Is there a legal matter?" "Possibly," Hale said carefully. "I'm reviewing county records and came across some irregularities. I wanted to verify the information directly. You have an enslaved woman named Sarah, property number 1147? Berkshire's expression shifted, not guilty, but cautious. "We do. She works in the quarters, helps with the younger children. Been here since, since before my father died. Why do you ask?" "The birth records show she's mother to 43 children over 22 years. A long silence filled the room. The colonel rose slowly and walked to the window, looking out over the fields where dozens of enslaved workers moved between cotton rows. "Your Honor," he said finally, "I think there's been a misunderstanding in how those records were kept. Sarah isn't the mother of 43 children. She's the midwife." The explanation was simple, almost embarrassingly so. Sarah had delivered babies on the plantation for over 2 decades. Some record keeper at some point had mistakenly or carelessly listed her as the mother instead of the attending midwife on the birth certificates. The error had been repeated over the years, creating the appearance of an impossible medical phenomenon. Judge Hale felt foolish for not considering this immediately. Of course, a clerical error compounded over time. It made perfect sense. Except it didn't. That evening, back in his rented room above the general store, Hale couldn't shake his unease. He reread the certificates by lamplight. The handwriting changed from document to document. Different officials, different years, different clerks. How could the same mistake be repeated by dozens of different people over 2 decades? He examined the certificates more closely. Each had been signed by the attending physician or registrar. Names he recognized: Dr. Samuel Perkins, Dr. James Willoughby, County Registrar Henry Moss, all respected men, now deceased. Had they all made the same clerical error? The next morning, Hale returned to the courthouse basement. "Mr. Dobbs, show me the standard procedure for recording enslaved births." Dobbs pulled out the county manual published in 1823. The process was clear. The attending physician or midwife reported the birth to the registrar within 30 days. The registrar recorded the mother's name, the child's name and sex, the plantation, and the father if known. Where in this process would a midwife's name be recorded? Hale asked. "Here." Dobbs pointed to a separate column. "Attended by." It's separate from the mother's name entirely. Hale felt cold certainty settle in his stomach. Pull every birth record from Berkshire Plantation for the past 25 years. All of them. It took Dobbs 3 days. When he finished, he had compiled a ledger showing 217 births at Berkshire from 1826 to 1851. Of those, 194 correctly listed different mothers and different attending midwives or physicians. 23 listed Sarah as the attending midwife, properly recorded in the attended by column, and 43 listed Sarah as the mother, with unknown as the father. 2 different record types, Dobbs said quietly. The clerical error theory doesn't hold. When Sarah delivered babies as a midwife, she was properly recorded as such. But these 43 certificates specifically list her as the biological mother. Judge Hale studied the ledger in silence. Outside, evening was falling over the town. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang 6 times. "I need to speak with Sarah," he said. Colonel Berkshire was less welcoming during the judge's second visit. "Your Honor, with all respect, this seems like unnecessary intrusion. The woman is my property. The records are old. What exactly are you investigating?" Hale chose his words carefully. In Mississippi in 1851, a judge's authority had limits, especially regarding how a plantation owner managed his enslaved workers. But record fraud was a legal matter, and unexplained irregularities in official documents fell within his jurisdiction. "I'm investigating potential errors in county birth records, Colonel. If there's systematic fraud or misreporting, it affects property law, inheritance, and legal standing. I need to verify the information directly." Berkshire's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Fine, but I'll accompany you." The slave quarters stood a quarter-mile from the main house, 2 rows of wooden cabins facing each other across a dirt path. Smoke rose from clay chimneys. Children played between the buildings, their laughter a strange counterpoint to the gravity of Hale's visit. Sarah lived in the 3rd cabin on the left. Berkshire knocked once, then pushed the door open without waiting. The interior was dim, lit only by firelight. A woman sat in a rocking chair near the hearth, her hands folded in her lap. She was small-framed and looked to be in her 50s, though Hale knew enslaved people often appeared older than their years due to the harshness of their lives. When she looked up at the judge, he was struck by her eyes, dark, clear, and utterly unreadable. "Sarah, this is Judge Hale. He has questions about some birth records. You'll answer him truthfully." The colonel's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Hale stepped forward, hat in hand. "Sarah, the county records show you listed as mother to 43 children between 1829 and 1851. Is this accurate?" She looked at him for a long moment before answering. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "Yes, sir." The simple answer stopped Hale cold. He had expected confusion, denial, and explanation, not calm confirmation. "That's medically impossible, Sarah. A woman can't give birth 43 times in 22 years. "No, sir, she can't." The room felt suddenly smaller. Colonel Berkshire shifted uncomfortably by the door. "Then why do the records say this?" Hale pressed. Sarah's expression didn't change. "Because I'm listed as the mother, sir. That's what the papers say. But you're not the biological mother of all these children." "The records say I am, sir." Hale felt frustration building. She was answering his questions while saying nothing at all. He tried a different approach. "Sarah, did you give birth to children on this plantation?" "Yes, sir." "How many?" "2, sir. Both died before their first year." The answer hit Hale like a physical blow. "When was this?" 1835 and 1837, sir." He checked his ledger. 2 of the 43 certificates fell in those years, March 1835 and January 1837. Those were hers. The other 41 were not. "Then why are you listed as mother to the others?" Sarah looked at the fire. "Master would know better than me about the paperwork, sir." Colonel Berkshire stepped forward. "Sarah works as a midwife and helps care for children in the quarters. Perhaps that's why her name appears in the records. Some confusion between her role as caregiver and biological mother." But Hale was watching Sarah's face. She said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. Judge Hale returned to the courthouse with more questions than answers. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Sarah's face, the way she'd answered his questions with perfect honesty while revealing nothing. "The records say I am, sir." Not "I am," but "the records say I am." At first light he was back in the basement with Dobbs. "Show me the mothers of the other births at Berkshire, the ones not attributed to Sarah." They spent the entire day cross-referencing. The 194 other births at Berkshire Plantation from 1826 to 1851 were attributed to 47 different enslaved women. Most had 2 to 6 children each over the years, a normal, expected pattern. But those 43 births attributed to Sarah stood out like a wound. "What if," Hale said slowly, "the fathers weren't unknown? What if someone deliberately left that field blank?" "Why would they do that?" Dobbs asked. Hale didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about property law, about inheritance, about the uncomfortable truths that slavery created. If an enslaved woman gave birth, the child belonged to her owner. But if the father was a free man, particularly a white man, there could be complications, especially if that white man was... Pull the records for Colonel Berkshire's legitimate children, Hale said quietly. Dobbs paled. Your Honor, that's a serious accusation. I'm not accusing anyone, I'm examining records. The colonel had been married twice. His first wife, Margaret, died in 1834 after bearing him 2 sons. His second wife, Elizabeth, married him in 1836 and remained childless until her death in 1848. He had not remarried. So the timeline of his legitimate children was clear. 2 sons born in 1830 and 1832. Hale compared this to Sarah's list. The 43 births attributed to Sarah began in 1829 and continued until 1851, well past the colonel's second wife's death. But the pattern didn't quite fit. If the colonel was the father, why use Sarah's name at all? Why not list the actual mothers? Unless... Hale's blood ran cold as a new possibility emerged. Mr. Dobbs, I need the death records for Berkshire Plantation. All of them. The clerk's hands shook slightly as he pulled the requested volumes. He had worked in this basement long enough to sense when something dark was surfacing. The death records told a grim but expected story. Enslaved people died from disease, exhaustion, accidents, childbirth complications. The plantation had lost 93 enslaved workers over 25 years, a mortality rate that was unfortunately common for the time and region. But when Hale cross-referenced the deaths with the birth records, a pattern emerged that made his stomach turn. 17 enslaved women had died on Berkshire Plantation between 1829 and 1851. Of those 17, 12 had died in childbirth or within weeks of giving birth. Their babies had survived. Their birth certificates listed Sarah as the mother. Dear God, Dobbs whispered. The picture was becoming horrifyingly clear. Sarah wasn't giving birth to 43 children. She was being listed as the legal mother of children whose biological mothers had died. But why? Hale paced the basement, his mind racing. In the legal framework of slavery, children followed the condition of their mother. If an enslaved woman died in childbirth, her baby still belonged to the plantation owner, maternal status inherited through the mother's enslaved condition. But replacing the dead mother's name with Sarah's name in official records, that was fraud. That was deliberate falsification of legal documents. Unless there was a reason those biological mothers couldn't be named. Dobbs, I need you to find something for me. Check if any of those 17 women who died in childbirth have other children listed in the records, births before the one that killed them. The clerk worked through the night. By morning, he had the answer. 16 of the 17 women had no other recorded births. They appeared in the records only once, the birth that killed them, now attributed to Sarah. But one woman, name listed as Mary, property number 1089, appeared twice. She had given birth in August 1843 to a daughter named Grace, recorded properly with Mary as mother. Then in June 1845, she died in childbirth. But that birth certificate listed Sarah as the mother. Why would Mary's first child be recorded under her name, but her second under Sarah's? Hale asked aloud. Dobbs had gone grey. Your Honor, I think you need to look at the plantation acquisition records. The plantation ledgers were property records, not vital statistics, and they were stored in a different section of the basement, financial documents rather than human records, though in this context, the two categories overlapped horrifically. Berkshire Plantation maintained meticulous purchase and sale records for all enslaved workers. Most had been born on the plantation or purchased from nearby estates. Their provenance was clearly documented, but 16 names stood out. Between 1829 and 1850, Colonel Berkshire had purchased 16 young enslaved women from various sources across 3 states, Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina. The purchases were unusual for several reasons. First, all 16 women were purchased individually, not as part of family groups. Rare for the time, as enslavers typically preferred to keep families together to prevent unrest. Second, all were purchased at ages between 14 and 19, precisely childbearing age. Third, all were described in the bills of sale as healthy, suitable for domestic work, yet none appeared in the household staff records. They had been assigned to field quarters. Fourth, all 16 women had died within 3 years of purchase. Cause of death, childbirth complications, and the certificates for the babies who survived those births all listed Sarah as the mother. Dobbs spread the purchase receipts across the table like cards in a terrible game. He was buying pregnant women, the clerk said, his voice hollow. Young women who were already with child, probably by white men on their original plantations. He purchased them, brought them here, and when they died giving birth, he listed Sarah as the mother to hide where the babies came from. But why? Hale demanded. The children would still be enslaved regardless of their mother's name. What was he hiding? Maybe it wasn't about the children, Dobbs said slowly. Maybe it was about the fathers. Hale requested the county's sale records, all documented transfers of enslaved people in Harrison County over 25 years. It took a week to compile. Of the 43 children listed with Sarah as mother, 31 remained on Berkshire Plantation as of 1851. The other 12 had been sold, but not through public auction or standard estate sales. The bills of sale for those 12 were unusual. All had been sold to out-of-state buyers. All transactions occurred when the children were between 8 and 12 years old. And all sales were listed as private negotiations, with prices significantly higher than market value for enslaved children of that age. A 10-year-old field hand in Mississippi in 1845 might sell for $400, $600. These children had been sold for $1,200, $1,500 each. Someone was paying premium prices for specific children, and the transactions were deliberately kept quiet. Hale's hands were shaking as he made the connection. Light-skinned children born to enslaved mothers, fathered by wealthy white men, sold discreetly to buyers who asked no questions about parentage. But the mothers had to disappear. Because if the biological mothers were listed, especially if they had been recently purchased, it would be obvious what Berkshire was doing. Running a breeding operation using enslaved women impregnated by white men, then selling the mixed-race children at premium prices while erasing any paper trail that could create legal complications. Listing Sarah as the mother severed the chain of evidence. She had been on the plantation for decades, a familiar figure, a midwife. Her name on the certificates raised no questions. The real mothers, recent purchases who died in childbirth, simply vanished from the official record. But Hale still had questions. How did Berkshire know which enslaved women to purchase? How did he know they were pregnant with white men's children? And who were the fathers? The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, estate records from a recently deceased doctor in Mobile, Alabama. Dr. Edmund Cross had died in August 1851, and his executor was processing his estate. Among the papers sent to various parties regarding outstanding debts was a letter to Colonel Berkshire, dated 1847, that had never been fully paid. The executor sent a copy to the county court requesting judgment on the debt. The letter read, "Colonel Berkshire, per your request, I have identified a suitable candidate on the Willow Creek estate. Young woman, approximately 16, in early pregnancy. The owner is unaware of her condition. I can facilitate purchase at standard price, $650, before the situation becomes apparent. Please remit advance payment to secure the transaction. The father is a man of standing and wishes the matter handled discreetly. Your usual arrangement applies. Dr. Cross." It was there in black and white. A physician identifying pregnant enslaved women and facilitating their purchase before their pregnancy became obvious. The usual arrangement suggested this wasn't the first time. Hale felt sick. This wasn't accidental. This was a systematic operation. He petitioned for access to Dr. Cross's full estate papers, claiming potential fraud investigation. After 2 weeks and considerable legal wrangling, he received 14 letters between Dr. Cross and Colonel Berkshire, spanning 1838 to 1850. The letters were carefully worded, never explicitly stating what was happening, but the pattern was unmistakable. I have located another suitable candidate in Montgomery. The father is anxious for discreet resolution. Purchase price should be secured quickly before the condition becomes evident. Your system has proven effective in previous cases. Dr. Cross had been working with physicians, plantation overseers, and even clergymen across 3 states to identify enslaved teenage girls who had been impregnated by white men, often the plantation owners, their sons, or neighboring landowners. These men wanted the problem to disappear without legal entanglement or social scandal. Dr. Cross would alert Colonel Berkshire, who would purchase the young woman at standard price before her pregnancy showed. She would be brought to Berkshire Plantation. She would give birth, often dying in the process due to young age, poor prenatal conditions, or complications. If she survived the birth, she frequently died within a year, possibly from subsequent pregnancies or simply from being worked to death. The babies, meanwhile, were listed with Sarah as the mother, severing any legal connection to their biological mothers or fathers. The children would then either remain as plantation workers or be sold discreetly at premium prices to buyers who valued light-skinned enslaved workers. And Sarah was the legal fiction that made it all possible. By listing her as mother, Berkshire created clean paperwork that asked no uncomfortable questions. But one question remained. Did Sarah know? Did she agree to this? Judge Hale returned to Berkshire Plantation on a grey November morning. This time, he came with legal authority, a court order allowing him to interview enslaved witnesses in a potential fraud investigation. Colonel Berkshire was furious but trapped by law. "This is persecution, Your Honor. You're harassing a respectable landowner based on old paperwork." "I'm investigating systematic fraud in county records," Hale replied evenly. "If you have nothing to hide, Colonel, the interviews will clear this up quickly." He interviewed Sarah in the same cabin, but this time without the Colonel present, his legal right as an investigating judge. Sarah sat in the same rocking chair, same posture, same unreadable expression. "Sarah, I know you're not the biological mother of 43 children. I know what's been happening here, but I need to understand your role in it. Did Colonel Berkshire force you to claim these children as yours?" "I never claimed anything, sir. I just did as I was told." "What were you told to do?" She was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, voices drifted from the fields. "When the young women came," she said finally, "I was told to care for them, help them when their time came, keep them comfortable. And when they died, I was told to take the babies and raise them as mine, tell anyone who asked that they were mine, sign the papers when the officials came. Did you know what would happen to those women when they arrived?" Sarah's hands tightened in her lap, the first sign of emotion Hale had seen from her. "Some were so young, sir, barely more than children themselves. I knew they weren't likely to survive. But what could I do? I was told to help them, so I helped them." "How many of them died, Sarah?" 16 that I remember, sir. Maybe more in the early years before I was keeping count in my head. "And the babies?" "I raised everyone that survived. Fed them, clothed them, taught them to walk and talk. The ones that stayed here, I cared for until they were old enough to work. The ones that were sold," her voice wavered slightly, "I never knew where they went." Hale leaned forward. "Sarah, you understand this was wrong, that Colonel Berkshire was using these women, letting them die, and profiting from their children." She met his eyes then, and for the first time, he saw something in her expression, not anger exactly, but a deep, weathered understanding that came from witnessing horrors for so long they had become routine. "Sir, I'm a slave. I do what I'm told or I die. Those women died bringing babies into this world. If listing my name on papers meant those babies had a chance to live, then that's what I did. You want me to say it was wrong? Yes, sir, it was wrong. But everything about this place is wrong. That don't change what happens. Judge Hale now faced a terrible choice. He had uncovered evidence of systematic exploitation, fraud, and negligent homicide. But in Mississippi in 1851, enslaved people were legally property. The women who had died had no legal standing. Their deaths, while tragic, were not legally murder. They were property losses. The fraud was the only angle he could pursue legally, falsifying birth records to obscure the origin of enslaved children. He began building a case. He interviewed 3 elderly enslaved workers on the plantation who confirmed Sarah's story. They remembered the young pregnant women arriving, staying in the quarters for a few months, then disappearing. They remembered Sarah taking the babies. He obtained testimony from a former overseer who had left Berkshire's employment in 1846. The man, now working on a plantation in Louisiana, admitted in a deposition that he had been instructed to keep the pregnant women separate and report their conditions only to the colonel directly. He found financial records showing payments from Berkshire to Dr. Cross, amounts matching the advance payments mentioned in the letters. By December 1851, Judge Hale had enough evidence to bring charges of fraud and falsification of public records against Colonel Marcus Berkshire. The trial was set for February 1852. On January 8, 1852, 2 weeks before the trial, Colonel Marcus Berkshire died in his sleep. The plantation physician, Dr. Nathan Riley, certified the cause as heart failure. The colonel was 68 years old. His will divided the plantation between his 2 legitimate sons, both now adults with their own properties. Neither wanted to maintain Berkshire Plantation. They announced it would be sold at auction in March. Judge Hale petitioned the court to continue the fraud investigation against the estate, but without the colonel alive to testify, the case became significantly weaker. The colonel's attorneys argued that any irregularities in record-keeping were administrative errors, not criminal fraud, and that prosecuting a dead man's estate served no legal purpose. In March 1852, the Mississippi Supreme Court dismissed the case on procedural grounds, ruling that the fraud charges died with Colonel Berkshire. But Judge Hale wasn't finished. The estate auction took place on a humid morning in late March. Buyers came from across the state to bid on land, equipment, livestock, and enslaved workers. The auction catalog listed 123 enslaved people to be sold. Sarah was number 47 on the list, described as Sarah, female, approximately 50 years, experienced midwife and child caretaker, good health. Judge Hale attended the auction not as an official, but as a private citizen. He had spent the previous month making arrangements, calling in favors, and liquidating every personal asset he owned. When Sarah's lot came up for bidding, the auctioneer started at $300, low for a skilled worker, but reflecting her age. Several planters bid casually, driving the price to $480. Then Judge Hale raised his hand. $800. The crowd went silent. An enslaved woman in her 50s was not worth $800. The auctioneer, confused but pleased, called, "Going once, going twice." $1,000. Came a voice from the back. Hale turned. The bidder was a man he didn't recognize, well-dressed, prosperous-looking, with cold eyes. The judge's heart pounded. He had $850 to his name, everything he'd saved and borrowed. $1,050. $1,200. The stranger countered immediately. $1,500. Hale's voice cracked. The stranger smiled. $2,000. The crowd murmured in shock. Hale felt desperation claw at him. He didn't have $2,000. He didn't have anything close. $2,000 going once, going twice. $3,000. Every head turned. The new bidder was an elderly woman seated near the front, dressed in black mourning clothes. Hale recognized her, Mrs. Clara Henshaw, widow of a prominent judge from the northern part of the state. Wealthy, influential, and known for her abolitionist sympathies, though she rarely spoke of them publicly. The stranger in the back studied her for a long moment, then tipped his hat and sat down. He wouldn't outbid a respected widow in public. $3,000 going once, twice, sold to Mrs. Henshaw. After the auction, Mrs. Henshaw approached Judge Hale on the courthouse steps. She was 72 years old, with white hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Hale, I've been following your investigation. You did good work, even if the law failed to deliver justice." "You bought Sarah," Hale said, still reeling. $3,000. "I did. And tomorrow I'll manumit her, grant her legal freedom. She's earned that much and more." "Why?" The question burst out of him. "Why spend that fortune on one woman?" Mrs. Henshaw looked at him with something like pity. "Because you were trying to save her, young man, and you didn't have the resources. Because that man bidding against you was likely connected to one of the families whose secrets Sarah's silence has protected all these years. And because Sarah knows things, names, faces, dates. She's kept those secrets to survive, but free and protected, she might choose to speak." Hale felt hope flicker in his chest. "Will she testify? Will she name the fathers?" The old woman shook her head. "No, and I won't ask her to. Sarah has survived by knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Forcing her to testify would put a target on her back and accomplish nothing. The men involved are powerful, the children are scattered, and the legal system won't punish white men for what they did to enslaved women. You know that as well as I do." She was right, and Hale hated it. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now Sarah comes to live on my property in Natchez. She'll have a cabin, a garden, her freedom papers, and peace. The children still at Berkshire will be sold to other plantations. There's nothing we can do for them. The truth stays buried, and Sarah gets to live whatever years she has left without looking over her shoulder. That's not justice," Hale said bitterly. "No, it's not. But it's survival, and sometimes that's all we can offer." Judge Hale spent the following month tracking what happened to the 31 children who had been listed as Sarah's and remained on Berkshire Plantation at the time of the auction. They were scattered in the estate sale. 19 sold to plantations across Mississippi and Louisiana. 7 purchased by the colonel's sons and distributed to their own properties. 5 purchased by the mysterious stranger who had bid against Hale for Sarah, their fate unknown. Of the 12 children who had been sold before the estate auction, the ones who brought premium prices, Hale could trace only 4. One had been taken to Boston and, remarkably, freed by her purchaser in 1849. 2 had been sold to a plantation in Virginia and died of fever in 1850. 1 had escaped from a Kentucky plantation in 1850 and vanished, possibly reaching the north via Underground Railroad. The other 8 disappeared into the vast machinery of slavery, their fates unrecorded. As for the 16 young women whose deaths Sarah had witnessed, the ones whose babies were listed under Sarah's name, Hale found that 15 of them had no other recorded history. They appeared in the purchase ledgers, then in the death records, and nowhere else. No family ties, no previous owners who inquired about them, no traces beyond their brief, fatal time at Berkshire. But one name appeared in another context. Mary, property number 1089, who had given birth twice. Once to Grace in 1843, then died in childbirth in 1845. Grace had been sold in 1850 to a private buyer in Charleston. The bill of sale described her as mulatto female, age 7, suitable for domestic service. Sold for $900, well above market rate. Hale found one more document. A letter from the Charleston buyer to the colonel's estate, dated February 1852, asking if there were any others of similar quality available for purchase. The man was shopping for light-skinned enslaved children, and he knew Berkshire Plantation was the place to find them. On April 3, 1852, Mrs. Clara Henshaw filed manumission papers freeing Sarah in the Natchez courthouse. The document was simple, legal, and irreversible. Judge Hale traveled to Natchez to witness it. Sarah stood before the clerk, wearing a simple dress Mrs. Henshaw had provided, and received her freedom papers, the legal document stating she was no longer property but a free woman of color. She held the papers carefully, as if they might dissolve in her hands. "What will you do now?" Hale asked her afterward, as they sat on the porch of Mrs. Henshaw's property overlooking the Mississippi River. Sarah was quiet for a long time. "I'm going to remember their names, sir." "Who?" "The 16 women, the ones who died. Somebody should remember their names." She recited them from memory. Mary, Rachel, Hannah, Dinah, Leah, Judith, Naomi, Abigail, Esther, Kezia, Tabitha, Rhoda, Phoebe, Dorcas, Priscilla, Zilpah. 16 names, 16 lives, 16 women who existed in official records only as purchase entries and death certificates. Their motherhood erased, their children attributed to someone else. "I held every one of their babies," Sarah continued softly. "Raised them as long as I could. They deserve to have their mothers' names remembered, even if the papers don't say it." Judge Hale felt tears burning his eyes. "I'm sorry I couldn't get justice for them." Sarah looked at him with those same dark, clear eyes. "You got me free, sir. That's more than most people in your position would have done. The rest was never going to be fixed by courts or laws. That system was built to do exactly what it did. You were just the first person who cared enough to look closely at the papers." Judge Thomas Hale continued his work in Mississippi until 1857, when he accepted a position in Illinois and moved north just as tensions over slavery were reaching breaking point. He carried with him copies of all the documents from the Berkshire case, the 43 birth certificates, the purchase records, Dr. Cross's letters, the death records. He intended to publish them someday, to expose what had happened. But the Civil War erupted in 1861, and the world became consumed by larger horrors. His small case of fraud and exploitation seemed like a single dark thread in a tapestry woven entirely from darkness. Sarah lived with Mrs. Henshaw until the widow's death in 1858. In her will, Mrs. Henshaw left Sarah a small house in Natchez and enough money to live modestly. Sarah spent her remaining years taking in children, orphans, abandoned babies, children of newly freed people who couldn't care for them. She died in 1867 at approximately 65 years old and was buried in the Natchez City Cemetery under a simple stone that read, "Sarah, beloved mother to many." The 43 children whose births bore her name scattered across the South and beyond. Some remained enslaved until the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Some gained freedom earlier through escape or purchase. Many died young, their lives brutally short. One of them, a woman named Charlotte, made it to Philadelphia in 1863 and learned to read and write. In 1869, she published a brief memoir describing her early childhood being raised by a woman named Sarah, who cared for all the children in the quarters. Though we never understood why we all called her mother when we looked nothing like each other. Charlotte had been born in 1842, listed in Harrison County records as daughter of Sarah, father unknown. Her biological mother, whose name she never learned, had been a 17-year-old girl purchased from a plantation in Georgia and who died hours after Charlotte was born. Charlotte lived until 1904, long enough to see her own grandchildren born free. In 1923, a historian researching slavery in Mississippi discovered Judge Hale's papers in an archive in Springfield, Illinois. The documents had been donated by Hale's descendants, who hadn't understood their significance. The historian published a paper titled "Fraudulent Birth Records and the Concealment of Exploitation," a case study from Harrison County, Mississippi. The paper detailed the Berkshire case, naming Colonel Berkshire, Dr. Edmund Cross, and describing the systematic operation they had run. The paper generated minor academic interest, but little public attention. By 1923, the horrors of slavery were being actively forgotten by much of white America, and academic papers about clerical fraud didn't capture headlines. The 43 birth certificates remained in the Mississippi State Archives, still listing Sarah as the mother, father unknown. The records were never corrected. To this day, if you search Harrison County birth records from 1829-1851, you'll find them. Official documents stating that one woman gave birth to 43 children in 22 years. The truth behind those certificates 16 young women purchased pregnant, dying in childbirth, their babies given to Sarah to raise and claim as her own, their existence obscured to protect wealthy white men from scandal and legal complication, exists only in Judge Hale's investigation notes and the historian's 1923 paper. The official story ends there. Fraud discovered, perpetrator dead before trial, one woman freed, the rest lost to history. But there are things the records don't capture. Shadows between the documented facts that raise questions for anyone who examines this case closely. First question. Why did Colonel Berkshire's death come so conveniently just 2 weeks before a trial that would have exposed not just him, but potentially dozens of wealthy men across 3 states? Dr. Riley, who certified the death as natural heart failure, had been the Berkshire family physician for 20 years. His financial records show he received a payment of $500 from the colonel's estate in January 1852, listed as final services rendered, an unusually large sum for certifying a death. Second question, what happened to Dr. Cross's complete patient records? When his estate was settled, his medical journals, which should have contained decades of patient notes, were listed as lost in a fire at his mobile office in August 1851, the same month he died. Convenient timing. Third question, who was the stranger bidding against Judge Hale at the auction? No one at the auction recognized him. He arrived in an expensive carriage, bid aggressively for Sarah specifically, while showing no interest in any other lots, then disappeared when outbid by Mrs. Henshaw. Hale later tried to find records of his identity, but found nothing. No hotel registry, no property records, no trace. Fourth question. How did Mrs. Henshaw know to attend that specific auction? She lived 80 miles away and had never purchased enslaved workers before. Yet she arrived with precise knowledge of what was happening, bid exactly enough to prevent Sarah's purchase by the stranger, and had already prepared manumission papers before the auction even occurred. When Judge Hale asked her about this, she simply smiled and said, "I have friends who keep me informed about injustices, Mr. Hale. Let's leave it at that." In 1872, 7 years after the Civil War ended, a Freedmen's Bureau worker in Natchez interviewed dozens of formerly enslaved people for a government documentation project. One interview was with an elderly woman identified only as Charlotte, age 30, formerly enslaved in Mississippi. This was the same Charlotte who would later publish her memoir. The interviewer asked her about her family history. Charlotte's response was recorded in the official transcript. "I was told Sarah was my mother, but I don't think she was. I think my real mother died when I was born. And Sarah took me in because that's what she did. She took in all of us. There were so many of us. Dozens, all different ages, all different shades. We called her Mama because she was the only mother we knew. But late at night sometimes, she would sit by the fire and whisper names. I asked her once what she was doing, and she said she was keeping the record the papers won't keep. I didn't understand until I was grown." The interviewer noted that Charlotte believed Sarah had memorized the names of the biological mothers whose children she raised, preserving their existence in the only way available to her. Oral memory, passed in whispers, never written down. When Sarah died in 1867, that oral record died with her. The 16 women, Mary, Rachel, Hannah, Dinah, Leah, Judith, Naomi, Abigail, Esther, Kezia, Tabitha, Rhoda, Phoebe, Dorcas, Priscilla, Zilpah, exist now only in that single interview transcript and in Judge Hale's investigation notes. Official Mississippi records still list Sarah as the mother of 43 children, father unknown. Thomas Hale served as a judge in Illinois from 1857 until his retirement in 1889. He became known as a fair but stern jurist, particularly in cases involving exploitation of vulnerable people. He never married. Colleagues remembered him as solitary and driven, a man who carried the weight of cases that could never be properly resolved. In his private papers, discovered after his death in 1891, was a journal entry dated November 12, 1851. I have seen the machinery of evil, and it is made of paperwork, not violence, though violence is there, not cruelty, though cruelty abounds, but paperwork, clean, official, legally filed documents that transform human beings into numbers and numbers into profit. Sarah is not listed as mother to 43 children because anyone believed it true. She is listed thus because it was convenient, because it hid uncomfortable truths, because it made the system function smoothly. I have learned that the law can be a tool for justice or a tool for obscuring injustice. The same forms, the same procedures, the same courts. What determines which purpose it serves? The conscience of those who wield it. I tried to wield it justly. I do not know if I succeeded. Among his papers was also a list of names. The 16 women Sarah had named, written in Hale's careful handwriting. Beside each name was a single word: remembered. After the auction, Berkshire Plantation was purchased by a cotton consortium from Natchez and operated until 1863, when Union troops burned the main house during a raid. The property was abandoned and eventually subdivided. The slave quarters where Sarah had lived and raised 43 children, not her own, stood empty for decades, slowly collapsing under weather and neglect. By 1900, nothing remained but foundation stones and a few collapsed chimneys. But local people, particularly freedmen and their descendants, remembered the place. They called it Sarah's Quarter, though most had forgotten why. In 1934, during the Depression, a WPA project documenting historical sites in Mississippi sent workers to map old plantation locations. At the Berkshire site, they found the foundations and interviewed elderly residents about the property's history. One woman, 92 years old, told them, "My grandmother was born there. She said there was a woman named Sarah who took care of all the children. Grandmother said Sarah wasn't really their mother, but she was the only mother they had. Said Sarah used to sing to them at night, old songs about Moses and the river. Grandmother said she understood those songs better after she got free." The WPA workers documented this as local folklore and moved on. The Berkshire case raises questions that historians still debate. How widespread was this practice? The evidence suggests Colonel Berkshire wasn't unique. The existence of a physician network identifying pregnant enslaved girls, the ready market for light-skinned enslaved children, the sophisticated fraud system, all point to established practices, not isolated incidents. How many other Sarahs existed across the South? Women whose names appeared on dozens of birth certificates as legal fictions to hide the exploitation and death of young mothers? How many children grew up never knowing their biological mother's names, raised by women who carried the secret of their true origins? And most disturbingly, who were the fathers? Dr. Cross's letters referenced men of standing who wanted discreet resolution. The premium prices paid for certain children suggested buyers who valued light skin, implying the fathers were white. The elaborate system to hide parentage suggests the fathers had social positions to protect. Were they plantation owners like Colonel Berkshire, their sons, overseers, neighbors, business associates, clergymen? The records will never tell us. The fathers are listed as unknown in every single certificate, and they stayed unknown, protected by the same paperwork that erased the mothers' names. The final documented reference to Sarah appears in the 1870 federal census for Natchez, Mississippi. Listed as a resident of the Henshaw property, now owned by Mrs. Henshaw's niece, is Sarah, no surname, black, female, age 65, occupation, midwife, status, free. She died less than 3 years later. The brief obituary in the Natchez newspaper on March 14, 1867 read, "Sarah, a colored woman formerly enslaved, died Tuesday at the Henshaw residence. She was known in the community for her work as a midwife and her kindness to children. She is survived by no immediate family. Burial at City Cemetery." No immediate family. The phrase carries a terrible irony. Sarah had been legal mother to 43 children. She had raised them, fed them, comforted them, taught them to survive. But when she died, she was listed as having no family at all. Somewhere, scattered across the country, were dozens of people who had called her Mama, the only mother they remembered. But the law didn't recognize those bonds. Sarah died alone, legally childless, despite decades spent mothering children who weren't hers. Her grave marker, placed by Mrs. Henshaw's family, simply reads, Sarah, beloved mother to many, 1802-1867. No surname, no birth record, no family name. Just Sarah, whose name appeared on 43 birth certificates, who mothered children born of exploitation and tragedy, who kept 16 dead women's names alive in her memory, and who was finally freed. 4 years after the Emancipation Proclamation made her freedom a national guarantee rather than one wealthy widow's gift. The Harrison County birth certificates still exist. They're stored in the Mississippi Department of Archives and History in a climate-controlled vault in Jackson. Researchers examining antebellum birth records will occasionally stumble across them. 43 certificates, same mother, no father listed, spanning 2 decades. Most assume clerical error and move on. But if you pull the certificates and examine them closely, if you compare them to purchase records and death records, if you trace the financial transactions and read Dr. Cross's letters, the true story emerges like invisible ink exposed to light. A story of 16 young women purchased pregnant and worked until they died. Of 43 children born into slavery, many sold away, their origins deliberately obscured. Of one woman named Sarah who became a legal fiction, a name on documents hiding systematic exploitation. And of a young judge who discovered the truth but couldn't deliver justice, only witness it. The papers remain in that archive, labeled Berkshire Plantation Birth Records, 1829 to 1851, anomalous documentation. Academic shorthand for, something was wrong here, but we're not quite sure what. But now you know what the papers don't say. You know about the 16 names Sarah whispered by firelight. You know about the stranger at the auction who tried to buy her silence. You know about the physician's letters that burned too conveniently. You know about the children who never knew their mother's real names. And you know about Sarah, who survived by becoming invisible in the records while being visible everywhere that mattered. In the quarters, rocking babies who weren't hers, singing songs about Moses and the river, keeping a record the papers wouldn't keep, in memory if not in ink. The story ends in the past, in 1867, with Sarah's death. The 43 birth certificates remain in the archive, unchanged, official, and profoundly dishonest, a monument to how paperwork can be used to obscure truth rather than record it. And somewhere in Mississippi, foundation stones still mark where Sarah's cabin stood, where she rocked 43 babies and whispered 16 names that should never have been forgotten. That's where the story ends. That's what the records show and what they hide.